Here's the hardest demolition project I've ever taken on. I removed a 100-year-old 4-story chimney to make a 4-story hole in the middle of my house. Each brick was removed the same way it got there, one at a time, all 12 tons of them. So why do this? The caretaker and I bought a house. Its list price was reflective of an update long overdue, a massive demolition project hidden in plain sight. In the center of the house is a large triple fireplace chimney monstrosity that's been capped off and drywalled over probably for the last 30 years. And this is original to the house, which was built in 1900. So this is dead center in the middle of every floor of the entire house. So removing it would really add value and change the usage of the house to open floor plan. So I decided I could do this. But before starting this project, there's a few things to tackle. The water heater vents through the chimney. You can't just move this water heater to vent out the side of the house, so I had to buy a new one with a power blower. And now that the chimney is clear of utilities venting through it, I can start removing bricks from the top down, but the top is on the roof and I don't want to be there. It was at this time more economical to get a new roof on the house and asked the roofing company to demo the chimney from the roof to just below the roof rafters and patch that hole. So without ceremony, they just shoved the chimney off the roof and patched in the rafters. Now I can start from the inside. This is a bit tedious since we are living in the house and controlling the dust isn't possible. And this is just taking a brick out one by one, all 5,800 of them. I have to emphasize the massive scope of this project, and due to the expense of dumpster logistics, 70% of the bricks I removed, I handled another 2 times. That's once to remove them, another to get them out of the house into a pile, and then from that pile back into a dumpster when there was a dumpster. Rental dumpsters vary in price, but you usually have them for 7 days until you get surcharges for those extra days. So basically had to work for a few weekends until I had a big pile to fill a dumpster with. And speaking of dumpsters, this required 2, not just because of the volume of the bricks, but because of the actual tonnage all this waste was. Only big trucks with hydraulic lifts can provide dumpsters with the tonnage limit to do this. I highly suggest you read these dumpster contracts carefully. Some try to play things fast and loose. I'll spare you the details. There's other gotchas about permits for a dumpster, and these conditions vary everywhere. Fortunately, this sat entirely on my property. There were no overhead utilities, so I assume I was free and clear. I didn't get any tickets, so there's that. Okay, back to the actual work. Mandatory for this type of demolition is a respirator and a small sledge. The mortar on the chimney was so dry that a 2-pound sledge did 98% of this demolition. But the rest of the supplies were really dust mitigation. A significant amount of plastic tarp, blue tape is needed to create zones to work and keep the dust from spreading into the living spaces. And you're gonna need one of these air scrubbers, and it's cheaper just to buy one after the 6th day of renting it, so I did. It does have a pre-stage filter, which is cheap to replace, and a HEPA filter inside. This unit's rated to do 350 cubic feet per minute of air, and I just use this as pulling a negative pressure so the area I was demoing didn't push dust out, but that only works so well. So phase 1 of this is breaking down the chimney from the 3rd floor, sledging until I could get inside the chimney and remove bricks from the flue. This was probably the slowest part of the demolition because each brick had to be handed out a small window and tossed into a garbage can from the 3rd floor. Phase 2 was pretty similar, just carefully dropping bricks out of a slightly larger 2nd floor window. And this is where many of the cut corners started to show up when the house was renovated before we bought it. To hide the chimney, drywall was just nailed to this surface, so hammer swings had to be done with care not to dislodge the drywall. I had to brace with furring strips until I can remove the chimney and actually put a wall behind here. Phase 3 is on the first floor, which was a little bit easier. However, there's a massive volume of living space that had to be taped and sealed up from the demolition work. And since we were near grade, there wasn't a bottleneck of throwing bricks out a window, so I asked for some help. I made this brick chute, and with a wheelbarrow, we were able to move about 1,800 bricks in a day. But that was a really long 10-hour day that had, of course, a few setbacks. Like I mentioned, the living spaces in the house were built around the chimney to hide it and basically make you forget about it. That include the kitchen being built around and having a third of its cabinets hung or screwed into the brick facade of the chimney. These cabinets had to be taken down before they fell down when we were removing it. And we also discovered the first sign of the house using the chimney as partial load bearing for the second floor. So I braced the first floor to the second floor just to be safe. Another massive slowdown was handling the remnants of the fireplace. There were a total of 3 fireplaces that connected to this chimney, and all had been concreted up, which took significant force to get through. What was even more grueling was the remnants of the hearth. The hearths were never removed, but they definitely had new concrete poured over them to patch their crumbled remains to make a floor. Hidden beneath the floors was about 600 pounds of concrete and brick mass that had to be removed carefully. Phase 4 is the last and final stage, which was my doomsday scenario. This is the basement section along with the chimney's foundation, and every ounce of mortar and brick chunks that broke loose since the start of the demolition have fallen down here. The last section also include a century's worth of chimney soot and packed it with brick and mortar remains. This repeating nightmare of removing a layer of bricks, then shoveling the soot, then bricks comprised the last 8 vertical feet, which was incredibly slow and tedious. Eventually, we reached the foundation where I borrowed this concrete tickler to break up the last foundation remnants. And what was left was just a small patch to do with concrete that I already measured wrong. The total time to remove the chimney was from July to about November. This was a weekend warrior project, which extends the length it takes to do this. So it was about 30 days total of work spread over 6 months to remove the entire chimney. The total labor and hours just for all the demolition was about 240 hours. My guess was we moved about 6,000 bricks. The total cost to do all of this was about $2,200. That doesn't include what the roof costs, and that doesn't include what moving and buying a new water heater was. Those are separate budgets. I don't know what it costs to have a contractor remove a huge chimney in the middle of your house, but if you have an educated guess, please leave it in the comments. So the cost breakdown does look like this. Most of it was dumpster rentals of hauling and disposal many tons of waste. On top of the 30 days to do all this, I'm 8 days into just patching floors. This is removing the old joists, some that went diagonal with the chimney footprint, and replacing the void with joists that run parallel with the rest of the floor in absence of the chimney. Flooring goes on top and it's patched. Well, it's not quite as simple as that, but you get the idea. Adding flooring and renovating the area is in the future and a different project scope. So a huge thanks goes to Brian and Jen for volunteering to tackle this brutal work. Special thanks goes to the caretaker for hauling a huge portion of these bricks too. And massive props goes to my dad for just doing most of the joist hanging and giving me a few absolutely essential tools in the process of doing this demolition work. This project would have been morally and physically defeating without these people help. So please don't try this at home. Like, I don't recommend living in this space while doing this type of demolition, but sometimes that's just how things work. We closed and moved in on this house in the middle of February, and the cold of winter masked us from starting any projects, so we just moved in to live into it, and we'll remove the chimney later. What's next is putting the basement back together and building the arcade basement out with no longer the giant chimney in the way, and then fixing the rest of the floors and figuring out what to do with the rest of the house. So thanks for watching, and don't ever attempt to do this. It's too much work.